While many view the 1980s as an era of forgettable cars, the truth is that a number of automotive innovations and technology advancements came during this time period, and in particular, the interiors of some vehicles were, shall we say, far ahead of their time, or at least wonky. As the Buick division exited the 1970s and entered the 1980s, divisional management tried to place a greater emphasis on technology and performance in Buicks. With respect to the latter, this is one of the reasons why turbocharging became increasingly popular on various Buick models into the 1980s, and you saw a proliferation of so-called T-type models on everything from the Riviera to the Century to even the Skyhawk. And when it came to technology, Buick introduced a number of exclusive features that could not be found in other General Motors vehicles of the era or competitive cars. One example of this in-car technology was Buick's Electronic Command Center, the CRT display that sat at the middle of the Riviera and Riata's center stack that controlled everything from climate control to fan speed, trip computer, and also had provisions for a number of gauge displays included in it. However, 1 year prior to the downsized Riviera's release in 1986 and 3 years prior to the Riata's release in 1988, Buick introduced a relatively small car that would serve as its flagship for some of the latest technology of the time. This was the 1985 Somerset Regal Coupe, which was built off of General Motors' N platform that was engineered by Oldsmobile division, and not only spawned the Somerset Regal for the 1985 model year, but also the Olds Calais and the Pontiac Grand Am. The N cars rode atop a 103.4-inch wheelbase and measured about 180 inches, or 15 feet in overall length. They were designed as replacements for the General Motors X cars, and in Buick's case, that would be the Buick Skylark. For whatever reason, Buick chose to name the two-door version of this new N car the Somerset Regal, a name that would stick around only for a few years, and actually after the 1985 model year, Buick just referred to it as the Somerset. But the Somerset name was reserved for the two-door coupes, whereas in 1986, when the four-door version of the N car came out, it bore the Skylark name, the continuation of Buick's X car from 1980 to 85, which was also named the Skylark. On the exterior, the car sported the now familiar General Motors formal roofline design. It was patterned off of the 1976 to 79 Seville, but complete with a Buick-style waterfall grille up front and wall-to-wall taillights in the back, something that was becoming a Buick theme during this time period. Under hood for the 1985 model year in the Somerset Regal were two powertrain choices. The first was the familiar Pontiac-sourced Iron Duke 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine, which was a carryover from the X cars. It made about 90 horsepower at the time and was rather crude, if not reliable. Optional was a new 3-liter Buick-sourced V6 based on the Buick 3.8-liter engine. It now carried multi-port injection in the 3-liter form and generated 125 horsepower and was certainly the peppier of the two engines by quite a long shot. However, the real excitement for the Buick Somerset, if one can call it that, did not lie in its exterior styling, which was handsome but not very controversial, and it didn't lie under hood, where the powertrains were rather standard fare, although the 3-liter V6, as previously mentioned, was new with multi-port injection. It really came down to the interior on the Somerset, where Buick chose to feature a lot of technology in this new N car. Let's begin with the instrument panel, or the instrument pod as Buick liked to call it during this time frame. And Buick touted the fact that this instrument pod had all of its major controls within fingertip reach of the steering wheel. This included on the right-hand side the wiper controls as well as the optional control for the rear defogger, and on the left-hand side controls for the exterior lights and panel lights. In fact, in its dealer training videos, Buick touted this instrument pod as being inspired by none other than the Porsche 928. Yes, you heard me correctly. The Porsche 928 and its instrument pod inspired that instrument pod in the Buick Somerset. And you can see the inspiration here in this picture of a Porsche 928 interior, even with the headlight controls being on the left side of the steering wheel and the wiper controls being on the right side, just like they are in the Somerset. Buick also highlighted that they use so-called low travel switches in the instrument pod, meaning that the switches required very little fingertip pressure to activate the functions that they were designed to enable. Now, turning to what was directly in front of the driver's view in the Somerset, one will notice that there are no analog gauges, and that's because the Somerset was Buick's first vehicle with digital instruments as standard. Off to the left of the digital instrument cluster was what appears to be a regular fuel gauge, but it did have an important feature, and that was when the fuel got down to a quarter of a tank or less, the readout would reset and allow the driver to see better the amount of fuel that was left between a quarter of a tank and empty. Off to the right of the speedometer was a series of gauges that the driver could select from to fill this space. They included voltmeter, temperature gauge, oil pressure, as well as an RPM gauge. However, perhaps the coolest control in the interior was the pod-style radio that was in the Somerset, something that was not offered in any other GM vehicle, although a similar unit was offered in the Camaro Berlinetta interiors of this era. But for whatever reason, those are the only vehicles in General Motors stables that got these pod-style radios, and they're relatively attractive. Albeit, if you're driving down a rough road, they did have a tendency to squeak and rattle, despite looking cool. Beneath the radio were the climate control switches, and beneath those was the slot for the optional cassette tape player. Interestingly, Buick decided to place the power window controls in the center of the car on the console, as well as the mirror controls next to the parking brake lever. Also, some unique content on the Somerset was that the rear seat passengers not only got a center armrest in the Somerset, but they also got rear seat heating ducts, which was quite rare for the period. Overall, the Somerset really had quite a bit of unique content on its interior, certainly more than the average Buick of the era, and far more than what was found in the interior of many other General Motors vehicles, Cadillacs included. It's interesting that this daring, shall we say, interior was included in a car where the exterior styling was pretty sedate and nondescript, if not handsome. Let's close out now with an excerpt from the dealer training video for the 1985 Buick Somerset describing some of these features in more detail.
Now I'm going to give you a look at one of the handsomest interiors you've ever seen. Here's where Buick has really gone world class as far as I'm concerned. You can put what you're about to see up against any fine car built anywhere in the world. 5 passenger seating in total luxury and comfort. Let's begin in the back. The center armrest is standard, as are the rear seat headrests. The rear seat has its own heating and ventilation duct there in the back of the full operating console, where a rear seat ashtray is also located. Access to the rear seat is made simple by the easy entry features on the passenger side. Let me show you. Okay? Great. Now let me show you some of the distinctive interior features. Perhaps the most obvious is the instrument panel, or instrument pod as the designers call it. Do you know what other car has an instrument pod like this? The Porsche 928 that sells for more than $40,000. All the controls you need most are within fingertip reach. Lighting controls are on the left, while the windshield, wiper washer, and optional rear defogger controls are on the right. These switches are new low travel switches, which seem to respond instantly to a very light touch. The turn signal, high-low beam selector, and the optional cruise control work from this smartly slimmed-down multifunction lever. Now you ask, where are the gauges? You're looking at them. There, the Somerset Regal is Buick's first car with a standard electronic instrument panel. The speedometer is digital. The fuel gauge expands. Watch. Now you can tell exactly how much fuel you have left below a quarter of a tank. To the right of the speedometer is this multi-gauge with voltmeter, oil pressure, engine temperature, and tachometer. Tell me that isn't distinctive. But there are other advantages to this electronic instrument panel besides being unique. Electronics are designed to last a long, long time. There's nothing mechanical to wear out or adjust. The other controls are located here in the console. This radio head at the top of the console controls a remote, electronically tuned AM radio that's standard. It may be deleted for credit, of course. There's a full line of other fine Delco radios available too, which were designed especially for the Somerset Regal. Below the radio head are the heating and ventilating controls, optional air conditioning, and the optional cassette player. Next is the shifter. Then the controls for the optional power windows, mirrors, and last, the parking brake. Courtesy lights? Of course. In the upper quarter, on the roof a reading light, and on the doors. More conveniences include the visor vanity mirror on the right-hand visor, and this map strap on the driver's visor. When you think about owning a car like this, you should give serious thought to the optional equipment, which can make the car even more personal to you. Some of the possibilities for the Somerset Regal are really impressive. Vista vent sunroof, power seats, GM Delco Bose sound system, automatic electronic door locks, and many others. But look, there's plenty of time to go over the list in detail later. The first thing to do is to take this remarkably luxurious personal car for a demo drive. If you don't, you'll never know what you're missing. Come on, let's go.
Hope you enjoyed this presentation on the Buick Somerset interior. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. And if you want to learn more about the Camaro Berlinetta interior, check out my video on that. Thanks for watching.